After the big market crash in 2008, many folks thought the US economy would never go through something like that again. But here's the scoop. That idea is leading the US towards a pretty bad economic jam. Why? Well, US folks owe a whopping $17.1 trillion in household debt, and credit card debt alone has busted past the $1 trillion mark. Some signals, like the New York Fed recession probability, say the US might hit a recession in the next 12 months, and other signs are pretty spooky. So, is the worst economic crisis in US history on the horizon? What's the real story behind these signs, and what's headed our way? In this video, we'll break down how different things are adding up to a potential economic crisis in the US, just like JP Morgan and the Fed are saying. We're diving into the rising consumer debt and shrinking savings that set the stage for an economic crisis. When the folks in a country struggle to make ends meet, an economic crisis becomes pretty much bound to happen. They work hard and make money, but thanks to rising prices or inflation, they can't cover their bills, so they rely on their credit cards. This has been a common practice for years, but now it's hit a breaking point, creating a perfect recipe for economic trouble. The total debt that households in the country owe to banks and financial institutions has skyrocketed to a massive $17.6 trillion. This tells us just how wide the gap has become between what people earn and what they spend. Before the pandemic hit, the debt was only $14.3 trillion, but now it's ballooned to $17.1 trillion. Forbes even noted that credit card debt has crossed the $1 trillion mark for the first time ever. The difference between how much people are borrowing and how much they're saving keeps getting bigger. People are borrowing more money than ever, but they're saving very little. Inflation, even though it's easing up a bit, is still nibbling away at Americans' savings and encouraging them to take out more loans. But there's a catch when it comes to high inflation and rising interest rates. Both of these things are chipping away at people's savings and causing their credit card balances to rise. In March 2021, Americans were stashing away 26.3% of their disposable income, but by July, they were only managing to save a mere 3.5%. Some fresh data from WalletHub shows that in the second quarter of this year, US consumers piled on $43 billion in credit card debt. That's more than 3 times the usual amount of new debt households took on during the same time period since the Great Recession of 2007 or 08. Both the total amount of credit card debt and the debt per household have jumped up by about 8% compared to the previous year. Now, let's talk about how things are getting tough for many Americans when it comes to paying off their credit card and auto loans, all because of the rising cost of living. As these debts become harder to tackle thanks to inflation, there's a greater chance that people will start missing their payments, and that's what we call delinquency. In the second quarter of 2023, the rate of new credit card delinquencies hit 7.2%, surpassing levels we saw before the COVID-19 pandemic, according to the latest report from the New York Fed. In simple terms, for every 100 folks using credit cards, about 7 to 8 people couldn't pay back what they owed. This is the highest it's been since 2012, right after the market crash in 2008. At the same time, the rate of new auto loan delinquencies also hit 7.3% during that period, going above pre-pandemic levels. These growing delinquency rates have got people concerned about how well American households are doing financially. Some folks are worried that things might get even worse when student loans come due. On top of that, the Federal Reserve has increased interest rates 11 times in the past year and a half, making it more expensive to borrow money through credit cards, car loans, mortgages, and other personal loans. Right now, the average credit card interest rate stands at 24.37%, which is the highest it's been since they started keeping track in 2019. Falling behind on those monthly payments can result in paying interest on top of interest, possibly leading to delinquency or even default. This isn't just a problem for individuals. It's a concern for the banks too, because most of the loans they've handed out aren't getting paid back. This is likely to continue as the cost of living in the US keeps going up, and people will use credit cards more often. Eventually, the delinquency rate will go up even more, making banks and financial institutions more at risk because they won't have the money they're supposed to. That's when an economic crisis becomes pretty much certain. Now, let's chat about how banks play it safe when they figure out folks can't pay back the loans they've taken. Banks do this by tightening their rules for giving out loans because, well, they don't have much money to lend in the first place. Most of the money they had given out in loans isn't getting paid back. So to keep themselves from falling apart, they make it tougher to get a loan while they try to collect what's owed to them. Their plan for survival involves being less willing to hand out loans for stuff like buying things in installments, and they put limits on how big auto loans can be. By the way, around 49.2% of banks in the US have made it harder for small businesses to get loans. This is a big deal because it hits small businesses pretty hard. They can't get a loan when they need it, and that's a problem for the whole US economy. The US Chamber of Commerce mentioned that small firms are responsible for a huge chunk of the country's exports, about 97.3%, and they make up 44% of the US GDP. Now, here's something interesting to keep in mind. If we look at history, banks usually start being more careful about giving out loans about 9 months before regular folks start having trouble paying them back. This often acts like an early warning sign that an economic downturn might be on the way. Let's talk about the chance of a housing market crash. In 2008, the financial crisis began with housing market troubles. People couldn't repay low-interest mortgages, setting off a chain reaction. Looking at today's data, we see similarities to 2008. Even though the reasons might be different, what's happening in the US now is unique and could lead to a housing market crash. Both in 2008 and today, there are significant risks in the financial sector that could lead to broader economic problems. In 2008, it was tied to the housing bubble and subprime mortgages, while in 2023, it's regional banks struggling and issues with rising interest rates. Economists who predicted the 2008 crisis now suggest that falling home prices could trigger another crash in 2023. Ian Shepherdson, an economist, believes home prices could drop by 15% this year. To give some context, in 2008, home prices fell by 5.8% from June to December. While there might be a delay in getting real-time economic news, available data shows the US economy might not be as crisis-resistant as we think. What do you think about the likelihood of an economic crisis in the US now? If you found this video interesting, please hit the like button, and for more finance content, subscribe to our channel. See you in the next one.